Good morning, everybody. I make that bang on 11 o'clock, so let's get started. Thank you for joining us on today's webinar. I do hope that you're all keeping well. And for those of you who don't know me, my name's Carla Brown, and I'm the Managing Director of Oakmere Wealth Management, and I'm also a Chartered Financial Planner. First of all, just a little bit of housekeeping. You're all on mute, so you can see us. See me, but we can't see you. The cameras are switched off. There is a facility to ask questions, which hopefully you'll be able to see in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. We will try and answer the questions as we go through. If time allows, we're expecting it to take about an hour today. However, if not, or if we run out of time, then we will follow them up with you after today's session. So our webinar today is focusing on long-term care, and it's a minefield that many clients or families of clients will face at some point in their lives. I'm an accredited advisor with the Society for Later Life Advisors and a member of SOLA, which means that I've undertaken specialist training and assessment in providing long-term care advice. It's a qualification that most financial advisors don't hold, but I feel that it's such a specialist area and an area where emotional skills are just as important as technical skills. So it's a huge benefit to our clients to receive advice from a SOLA member. So a bit about what we're going to cover today. So during the presentation, we're going to cover some of the main issues involved in advising clients with care needs, as listed on the screen. However, please do remember that every single client situation is different, and what works for one person won't necessarily work for somebody else. Good advice can help with forward planning or even at the point of need. But the key point is that financial advice is so important in this area. Just to point out, the information being provided today relates solely to England, as the system is very slightly different in Wales and Scotland. So we're going to address the cost of care, and we're going to touch upon eligibility for state funding, as well as some means-tested benefits as well. We're then going to go on to the issues around navigating the social care system, which a social care system that is fundamentally broken, unfortunately, not fit for purpose, and is failing far too many vulnerable people. It's a system that, in my view, is unfair, it's complex, and has been in need of reform for at least the last 30 years. And whilst there have been many attempts over the last few decades, they have yet failed to materialise. Now, we're also going to go through a number of different options in respect of paying for care that are available. I'm going to look at the pros and cons, and then finally, we're going to look at our position on social care, how we as a business operate in the market, and how we work with our clients. And of course, there will be the opportunity for questions at the end. But as I said earlier, do type your questions into the Q&A box as we go through if anything springs to mind, and we will try and cover them all. So let's kick off. 1948 is a date that most people who are interested in care will either remember or be aware of. This is the date of the establishment of the National Health Service, the NHS, when healthcare was provided for all, irrespective of means. Far fewer people will be aware that in the same year, we had the National Assistance Act. And this act gave local authorities responsibility for social care on a means-tested basis. In other words, unlike the NHS, it's not care for all, irrespective of means. Since this act, the funding split between central government and local authority, the eligibility criteria for financial assistance, the nature and level of means testing, and the qualifying criteria and type of care provided has varied considerably. The National Health Service and Community Care Act in 1990 was designed to clarify some of the issues around the responsibility for provision of care, and it gave local authorities further responsibilities. The current funding system, as a result, is a revenue support grant, which is paid to local authorities from central government. And although it's not ring-fenced for care, along with income generated through local tax and business rates, plus further monies available from the Better Care Fund and the Improved Better Care Fund, which ultimately come from central government by the NHS. Nevertheless, and all too often, the care journey itself, and by which we mean the journey that an individual has through the social care system, at whatever point they start that journey, is often disjointed and confusing. There's a plethora of information available from a huge variety of sources, including state, local authorities, health professionals, voluntary sector organisations, as well as a large number of commercial entities. But the quality of the information available is mixed, and quite often it's difficult to see the wood for the trees. More often than not, there may be several individuals, the care recipient, and their families involved. Organising the right type of care, liaising with the local authority, arranging moves, selling properties, gathering information and advice from multiple agencies, and all the while battling conflicting opinions from a range of organisation, as well as coping with various levels of emotions, makes the whole process not only disjointed, but very difficult to navigate at a time of huge stress. Now, there has, over the last 30 years, been a huge number of reports, white papers, green papers, commissions and reviews around the state of social care, all with the best intentions designed to find a solution to bring to an end the complexity and to provide a system that looks after those who've ultimately made a major contribution to society. Unfortunately, to date, none of these attempts have led to any meaningful change. The only exception was the Dilnot report, which led to the 2014 Care Act. However, sadly, it was never fully enacted. This current government have promised to fix this crisis in social care once and for all, giving every older person the dignity and security they deserve. We certainly hope that it's true, but it doesn't change the fact that right now, the system in its current form is inadequate, unfair, and unsustainable. From our own experience and those of our clients, it's sadly failing to meet the needs of far too many vulnerable individuals. The system as it currently stands is only capable of providing funded care for those in the greatest need with the least ability to pay. In other words, the vast majority of us will need to make a significant contribution to the cost of our care, if not fully fund it. So, when we say that the state realistically will only fund the care costs for those in the greatest need with the least ability to pay, what exactly do we mean by that? Well, first of all, an individual needs to be assessed as eligible for care support, and that's based on his or her own care needs. Eligibility criteria varies by local authority, and the local authority is both assessing eligibility and then taking responsibility for the funding of it. This is clearly a conflict of interest, especially when funding is tight, and it inevitably leads to disputes over individual care needs. Then we have the issue of ability to pay. If you have assets, with some exceptions, anything above £23,250, then provided you're not eligible for NHS continuing care, you will not receive any financial help. Just to point out, the 23,250 is based on the 2021-22 fiscal tax year, but it only relates to capital. An individual's income is also assessed and will be fully included in any financial assessment above a personal expense allowance of £24.90 per week, which equates to just under £1,300 a year. All incomes included, so personal pensions, state pensions, investment income, property income, any earned income. Therefore, even someone on an income as low as £10,000 would be expected to make a contribution to their care of £8,700, even if they were below the asset threshold. Now, there are certain assets that are exempt from the threshold of 23,250, the principal of which is your primary residence. Second properties, however, are not exempt. But the primary property is only exempt if the husband and wife are both resident in the property or there is somebody living there who is financially dependent. Once one of a married couple dies, the property is instantly accessible. It's also probably pertinent to mention at this point that the rules around deliberate deprivation of assets are important. If the local authority feel that you've deliberately given away assets to avoid paying for care, then they will take steps to recover these. And local authorities are becoming increasingly litigious in this area. It's also worth pointing out that the vast majority of individuals will want to choose their own care and be commissioners of their own care needs, as opposed to what the local authority deemed to be appropriate based on their assessment of your eligibility. Also, it's important to understand that with very limited exceptions, it is not possible to do personal top-ups. So if you deprive yourself of property and assets in such a way that they're not counted in a financial assessment in order to get local authority funding, you can't then ask for a better form of accommodation and care by paying a personal contribution, and these will need to come from a third-party family member. The loss of control, in our view, is a considerable risk that we don't believe for the majority of clients is a risk worth taking. The slide you can see in front of you now outlines by region the average cost of both nursing and residential care, and it illustrates the sorts of costs that are involved. Now, for many people, these costs may come as a considerable surprise. And so the question should be asked that if you're living in the Southwest, can you afford £3,000 a month for residential care? Or if you're in the Midlands, can you afford £4,000 a month for nursing care? This is a market-leading survey, but it's dated 2019. It's the most recent survey that we have available. So we should also note that both nursing and residential costs tend to exceed above the rate of inflation and will all likelihood be at a higher level now. Just to give you an example, the typical rate of inflation on those fees is around 8% a year. Of course, nursing and residential care are not the only options. You can receive domiciliary care, which is care in your own home, and the costs, depending on region, will be somewhere on average between £15 and £20 an hour. Obviously, the total cost will depend on the level of care that you need, but even at this rate, if you have 5 hours of care a day, it's going to exceed £3,000 a month. You may also want to consider live-in care. Now, it's not an option that suits everybody, as it's what it says on the tin. You have somebody living in your own home. You'd have to have a spare bedroom, but you can employ these people either directly or through an agency and pay a fee for that. This is likely to exceed the cost of domiciliary care, but again, the costs do vary by region. So let's look at the routes into care. We've already stated, and most commentators would agree, that the social care system is in crisis and arguably has been for some time now. The word crisis also too often summarises the position that individuals find themselves in when they enter the social care system. They may find themselves being discharged from hospital, but can only do so once a care plan has been established. Or they may have had some kind of accident or fall, and as a result have an urgent need to find care. Or even it could be a realisation, often by close family members or friends, that the individual has reached a level of frailty that means they're no longer able to live at home without any form of assistance. So in other words, the need for care is not something that's often planned in advance or easily foreseen, but very quickly becomes urgent and pressing, which means that navigating a fragmented and complex social care system is all the more difficult. The King's Fund report from 2013, entitled Paying for Social Care, stated, "Who pays for what across health and social care is confusing and incoherent. Reform has been made harder because of the fragmented way the social care system has evolved, leaving a system that is crisscrossed with fault lines between the NHS and local authority social care, private and public funding, and private and public delivery." Now, whilst that was the reality when the report was positioned in 2013, sadly, it's still the case today. Different local authorities will have different levels of eligibility as to when an individual would qualify for financial support. They will need to be both medically and financially assessed. But how do you arrange such assessments? Who can do so? And what rights of appeal do you have? Then you have the issue around continuing health care, which, if you qualify, really is the golden goose, as that means that you'll have your care paid for in full. However, it's fraught with difficulty, such as, does the individual qualify? What are the rules? How do you apply? And what are the options if continuing health care is denied? Then you get the issues of what type of care is going to be appropriate for the individual. Will it be a residential home? Does the individual need nursing care? Many individuals rather stay in their own homes and receive domiciliary care, but will this match their needs? Can they find the right domiciliary care provider to match the needs? How much will it cost? And what type of domiciliary care provider is right? Or even, would a live-in carer be more appropriate? Does the individual have the spare room? And how do you choose which live-in care provider is going to match your needs? Almost all providers of personal care are regulated by the CQC. And whilst this can give a good guide to the quality of the operations, there is, and always has been, a high turnover of staff. And that's whether we're talking about residential, nursing, or domiciliary care. So how do you ensure that continuity of care? Also, how do you choose between the right type of care and the right location? It will often make sense to choose a location that is near to family members. But should you, or is it right to sacrifice location over quality? And finally, care for some people can be a journey that domiciliary care or living care might be right initially, but ultimately residential or nursing care may be more appropriate. However, not only do care needs for the individual change, but also do care facilities themselves. And so ensuring that the individual's ongoing care requirements are being met is also essential. Now, this slide replicates a section of a report completed by the Office of National Statistics, who produced a flow diagram on how self-funders would navigate the social care system. It's been produced without a hint of irony of what an individual and their family, who, to remind you, are probably likely to be in crisis, would need to go through to acquire the care that most suitably matches their needs. The reason I've included it in today's webinar is that it's simply there to pictorially demonstrate how complex, fragmented and convoluted the care system is for self-funders. So, as discussed earlier, if your assets are above the upper limit, then the local authority will not provide any assistance. Also, if your assets are below the lower limit, which is currently £14,250, then all of your income, less the personal expense allowance, which we said was £24.90 a week, will be assessed. And if it's below your own local authority fee scale, that will be topped up. For the majority of people, however, they will be responsible for their own care costs. That being said, there are some state benefits that you will almost certainly be able to claim. Attendance allowance is probably the most overlooked, and this is a non-means tested, non-taxable allowance for people aged 65 or over who are physically or mentally disabled and require care for 6 months or more. There are currently 2 rates, the lower of which is for those who need care by day or by night, and that's £60 a week, and the higher amount for those who need care both day and night is £89.60. And these are both paid weekly. Then you have the NHS funded nursing care, which is also a non-means tested benefit. And this provides care. This is available for those who need care provided by a registered nurse. And it's for people assessed as being eligible who live in a care home registered to provide nursing care. An assessment for NHS continuing care, the Golden Goose, should always be carried out before a decision is made about the eligibility to NHS funded care. Now, the weekly benefit for the nursing care contribution is currently £187.60, so it's not to be overlooked. In addition to all these benefits, all other forms of income can be used individually or cumulatively to pay for your care, and whether that's personal pension, state pension, pension credits, occupational pension, property income, or investment income. Our job as financial planners is to look at your care costs for your chosen type of care, to add in the personal expenses that you require, and to take this away from your total income, including benefits. If the total cost of care exceeds this number, then this is what we call the shortfall. As we've already outlined, the Oakmere approach to advising clients in the care market is first and foremost to ensure that we can help you navigate the social care system and arrive at a point where you've commissioned the care that best suits your needs. We can hold your hand through that process. The issue of funding care costs may sometimes be possible from income, but where it's not the case, then it's often the job of a financial planner to help meet this shortfall. This will more often than not require advice around the most appropriate methods of decumulating the individual's capital in whatever form that is. And we do that in the most practical and tax-efficient manner within the client's own investment risk profile and their desire to pass assets down to the next generation, which is often a consideration. Now, we believe there are fundamentally 6 ways to fund the care in this way. These are using the deferred payment scheme, renting out a property and that's assuming that the individual's moving into residential or nursing care. Equity release, where the individual may be electing for domiciliary or live-in care. Liquidating investments and assets generally into cash. Using existing investments to fund the care. Or finally, using a care fee annuity, which is currently the only specific product for care fees planning that exists in the market. We're now going to go on and look at the advantages and disadvantages for each of these methods. Put my teeth back in. So starting off with the deferred payment scheme. Now, this is an arrangement with the local authority that lets individuals use the value of their homes to help pay for care costs. If you are eligible, your local authority may pay your care home bills on your behalf, and in return, the individual can delay repaying the local authority until either he or she sells their home or until after death. The local authority will put a legal charge on the property and typically will only allow you to use up to 70 or 80% of the value of your home to pay fees. It does allow the individual to keep the property in their estate and allows the property to be rented out to produce additional income. To be eligible, you should have savings in capital of less than the 23,250, not including the value of your home. And you should be planning to be or to be in a care home, whether that's residential or nursing. Local authorities are likely to charge administrative fees to cover their costs, such as land registry, property valuations, legal fees, and there may also be later fees involved with property revaluations. When it comes to interest, some local authorities will not charge interest, but they are permitted to do so. Now, this can't be above the government-approved standard rate, which is linked to the market gilt rate, plus 0.15%. So this currently equates to just over 1%. Ultimately, however, the local authority might not make such schemes available. They don't all do this. And there could be a number of reasons, such as an inability to fund such an arrangement. If interest does accumulate, then technically there is no safety net. For example, there's no negative equity guarantee. And so ultimately, it's highly likely that you will need to sell the property to repay the debt, and there may be no equity to pass on to next generations. It is, for all intents and purposes, a form of equity release, and its suitability should probably be judged alongside other equity release options. Now, many people, for financial, practical, and often emotional reasons, might not want to sell the family home. However, in any practical sense, renting out a property to pay for care fees will often be untenable. While the individual, by retaining the asset, will benefit obviously from any increase in the value, as a method of producing income, there's a number of disadvantages. First and foremost, the net return, looking at average rental yields in the UK, is likely to be relatively low. Furthermore, you need to take into account any agency fees that might be incurred, plus there may be periods with no tenants, so you may have rental voids. You also need to consider whether the property is fit to be rented out. Does it need any capital expense to make it fit for purpose? And do you have the necessary certificates that are now required under current legislation for rental properties? And there's always going to be costs associated with maintenance and ongoing repair. This is before we even start thinking about any tax on the income that's being produced. So all in all, for most people, whilst it is an option, it's not usually the most viable. Still focusing on property. Now, as we said in respect to the deferred payment scheme, that is a form of equity release. And using your property in this way can be a way of decumulating value to top up or provide all of the income to pay care fees. And sadly, for some people, it might be the only option. There are now a large number of equity release options and products in the market, thankfully, and the benefits are very obvious. First of all, as with renting out the property, it does allow the individual to retain the property and the benefit of it for families, future generations. Furthermore, depending on the value of the property and the amount that is able to be withdrawn as capital, it can be easily available, and it's preferably done on a drawdown basis. So you just draw down the amount you need every year, and that way you pay less interest overall. However, there are also some significant disadvantages that we need to bear in mind. Now, as I've already said, there's a great deal of different equity release products available in the market today, and they should suit most individuals. But there is still amazingly, no dedicated long-term care equity release products. What I mean by this is that an equity release product would be needed that would allow the individual to retain the property should they no longer live there. Currently, in the market, equity release is only available when the individual is living in the property. So, should they get to the need where they need to leave and enter some form of nursing or residential care, the property would have to be sold. In addition, interest is charged on the debt. And although with interest rates having been low for so long, the position is better, interest rates on equity release products is generally higher than interest charged on standard mortgages. Typically, an equity release mortgage at the moment is between 4 and 6%, compared to a standard residential mortgage of between 1 and 2%. The debt itself will accumulate on the basis that interest is rolled up, which is an option that many equity release products have, which means that you don't have to make monthly repayments. However, the reverse impact of that compound interesting can create a significant debt, sometimes leaving very little value to be passed on to the next generation. Now, equity release may be the only option, but considerable care needs to be taken to find the right product that best suits the individual. And it might be worth sometimes paying a little bit more in interest to get a product that provides maximum flexibility should your situation change. For example, if you want to downsize or move in with family. So, turning assets into cash. This is by far the simplest and most straightforward approach, but it's by no means a simple decision or an easy decision. For example, some assets are not easily convertible into cash. Property is an obvious example, but as we've already discussed, the use of property in terms of the deferred payment scheme and equity release can be considered. Other assets, such as antiques, cars, pictures, and such like, may also be difficult to turn into cash at the point of need, or there may not be a ready market available for such assets from a timing perspective. If you do have to sell quickly, then you may not be able to get a fair price for the asset if you're looking to turn it into cash in the short term. Other assets that are more easily converted into cash, such as existing investments, often pose a different issue. So are there costs involved? Would it produce any income or capital gains tax liabilities? Can these liabilities be mitigated in any way? Can it be done over consecutive tax years? Does the liquidation of the investments involve coming out of the stock market? So in which case, is the timing of that withdrawal appropriate? Is now the right time to do that? Or would it be more appropriate to leave the funds invested for the long-term benefit of the individual's beneficiaries, if that's an option? Or considering some kind of drawdown strategy over a number of years? And finally, if you do liquidate everything and put it into cash, is holding cash in the bank to pay for fees for a number of years the most appropriate level of funding, given how low interest rates are? Is the individual even more likely to run out of money, considering the rates of inflation and particularly the rates of care fee inflation? So as you can see, what is in theory a straightforward solution, in practice can be very complicated, and there's a lot to consider in respect of this particular option. An alternative with investments could be repurposing investments for the use of meeting the care costs. Now, this could be whether they're ISAs, unit trusts, investment bonds, portfolios of shares, for example, and they'll face many of the issues that we've touched on in relation to converting assets into cash on the previous slide. Potential costs, tax liabilities, etc., are likely to be less acute, particularly if the investments have been set up in a tax efficient way. But careful consideration still needs to be given as to which assets should be used to generate the best returns, but also to ensure that the individual doesn't run out of money. Obviously, we also need to think about making sure the money is working as hard for the individual and the client's families as possible. So by the same token, using assets that are linked in some way to the markets involves an element of risk. And so that level of acceptable risk will depend on a whole host of factors, not simply the risk profile of the individual themselves or their power of attorney, but by the level of funds that they have available and how hard we need that money to work for them. It could be the client's own investment experience or the investment experience of the attorney. And of course, what the shortfall is, how much do we need these investments to generate? Is it appropriate or even possible? So as with the issue of converting assets into cash, utilising investments to draw down capital to meet care fees requires careful advice. The investments may need to be changed. However, it's not always necessary, but how best to draw them down will most definitely need ongoing guidance. So, all very complex so far, but now let's have a look at care fees annuities. So care fees annuities are also known as immediate needs annuities, and they are actually the only financial product available which is dedicated to meeting care costs. So a care fees annuity involves the payment of a lump sum that will pay a fixed monthly income, and that could be an income that's either level or indexed, and we can choose the rate at which it's indexed, but it will pay that monthly income for the lifetime of the investor. So fundamentally, these investments are produced to designed to ensure that the individual will never run out of money and that he or she will always be able to meet their care costs. It's almost always worth looking at the costs, which are individually assessed, and they're based upon not just the level of income that's required, but also importantly, the health of the individual that's purchasing them. We will always get fully underwritten quotes, getting reports from doctors and care homes to make sure that the quote that we get is as accurate as possible. The care fees annuity will provide a high level of return, which is paid tax-free to the care provider. However, it can be considered an expensive option. It relies on an initial capital outlay. It's obviously a risk to the capital if the purchaser of the investment then dies early. Now, you can build in capital protection to try and protect some of that capital in the event of the person dying early. However, that simply increases the cost, so it's something you need to be aware of. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to entirely fund care fees or the shortfall with a care fee annuity. And you can use a combination of care fees annuity with other methods of funding, which can help to protect the capital for future generations if that's a concern. By the same token, if the care fees increase at a higher rate than the income that is being paid from the care fee annuity, there may ultimately be a mismatch. And in this case, negotiating a rate of increase in care fees to match the care fee annuity is often advised if this is possible. And we do find that care homes are open to this. Finally, it's also possible to purchase a deferred version of these investments, whereby the income will only start to pay in 2, 3, or 4 years' time. Now, whilst you're still handing over the capital up front, it provides a guarantee that the care fees will only be paid once the income starts, and you're going to use cash in the short term. Again, using care fees annuities in conjunction with other financial products will need sound financial advice. We've talked a lot during the presentation so far about the complexity of the system, and the previous slides have demonstrated this. Now, in practical terms, this means for the majority of individuals and their families, where there is a care need, they have nowhere to go for advice to help them navigate the social care system. They have no one to answer the huge number of questions that the majority of people will have. This fact alone is recognised by many as one of the most significant barriers to the receipt of good quality care. And it certainly does very little to ease what for many people is a very stressful period of their life. As I've said before, it's often a point of crisis. As a result, and part of the way that Oakmere have chosen to operate in this market, we've introduced for our clients a care concierge service with an independent firm called CareSourcer. This is a telephone-based system. It's manned by individuals who are experts in the social care and the social care system. While there's lots of information that an individual and their families can obtain from the internet, in practice and in our experience, not only are all clients' circumstances and needs very different, their journeys through the care system as a consequence of this will also be very different. The majority will want and will benefit from specific advice relating to their own personal circumstances. CareSourcer provides someone who is able to answer all of your questions, to help you design a care plan, and to help you understand the specific eligibility requirements required for your own local authority. They'll help you to obtain medical and financial assessments. They will explain the results and the implications to you, and they'll help you to understand the types of care that best suit your circumstances. Importantly, how to commission the care and what to look for when you're qualifying for continuing healthcare, what benefits are available to you, and a plethora of other issues. Ultimately, CareSourcer is there to help an individual navigate the social care system. And importantly, they will stay with you until you've completed that journey and selected the care that is right for you. Now, not only that, but they will reassess the suitability of that care after an initial period. And we've had great success so far working with CareSourcer. We believe that this is essential. Paying for care is very much something that we as financial planners can assist with, as well as a host of other financial issues that an individual can be faced at this time. However, the primary need and what we need to get right first of all is finding out what is right for the individual, what they need, the type of care they need, and how to source it. And namely, all the issues that CareSourcer are experts in. Now, this service would normally cost around £500, but for our clients at Oakmere, this is something that we are now providing free of charge. This is our commitment to our clients to be there for them and to provide the very best service at what will be a hugely stressful and emotional time in their lives. And it's part of the value that we believe that we add. The slide you can see in front of you now summarises just some of the thoughts of two of the individuals who've been through the CareSourcer service. I know the experience that I've had with clients going through the service has just been phenomenal. It's taken a huge weight away from the family's minds. It's helped them work out the care package and find the appropriate care homes, even booking the appointments with the care homes. And so finally, we've set out a joined up approach. We want to ensure that our clients are helped through the social care system, to ensure that they find the right care in the right place at the right cost, and then to help them fund that cost in the most appropriate manner. We want to ensure wherever possible that the cost of care leaves as much capital as possible to transfer to the next generation, if that's the individual's wishes. And the transfer of those assets, in whatever form, is also very much part of later life planning. Now, you may all have powers of attorney in place, and that's fantastic. But if not, it's something that I stress that you look to do. And we can help with that if you need that put in place. It's also essential that you have a will and that you understand how this affects transfers of assets. And if you have trusts, then there should be an appropriate expression of wish in place that matches how you want your assets to be transferred to the next generation and the generation beyond that. those two areas alone, powers of attorney and wills, are probably a webinar in their own right, and perhaps something we'll look to come back on. For those situations where there may not be sufficient assets to pass down to generations, or maybe just not as much as you would like, or maybe where future generations might struggle with their own care costs, then we can look at long-term care insurance, which has recently come back into the marketplace. And as with all insurances, it's often the cheaper the earlier you start that kind of thing. And finally, I just want to say that not only do we, as part of St James's Place, operate with our clients in the care market, but as a business, we are active in encouraging the government to find a solution to the social care crisis. We believe it's our social responsibility to do so, and it's part of our commitment, not just to existing clients, but also to new clients and to those who may never ultimately be part of clients of Oakmere. So that's the end of the webinar. I'll now take any questions. I can see there's been a couple that have come through, so let me just open up the questions. Just bear with me. Okay, so question here. What would be my first port of call if I think my parent may need care at home? So there's a number of options around somebody needing care. First of all, is establishing, do you want them to stay in their own home? So looking at domiciliary care generally, first of all. I would say if you're a client of Oakmere, contact us. We would put you in touch with Care Sourcer. As I say, it's at no cost to you. It's part of our service. And they would help you establish, first of all, what benefits may you be entitled to? Are you claiming attendance allowance? Is there anything else we can get for you? But also looking at local domiciliary care providers. We have a few, certainly in our locality, that we know very well. But Care Sourcer would be able to help you look for the right provider that's perhaps specialist in the type of care that's needed. Now, it might, first of all, be a couple of hours a day or a couple of hours a week, somebody to go in and help with the shopping or the cleaning, or maybe just getting somebody up in the morning and putting them to bed at night. What we generally find is that over time, that care need will increase. And so it's making sure that you look for a care provider that can scale that resource as well. If you think it's maybe time that they needed residential care, again, locally, we know a lot of the care homes here, but Care Sourcer can help you. They can look for homes that, first of all, have availability. It may be, again, there's a specialist requirement, such as an EMI department, but also looking at cost, looking at funding, and looking at the right care home. And they can even make the appointments for you to go and visit, as I say. So hopefully that answered that question. Okay, next question here is, what is the benefit of having a will and a power of attorney in place? Okay, I recommend all my clients have wills and powers of attorney. A lot of people think that a power of attorney is only for old people. That is not the case at all. I've got a power of attorney. I don't think I'm that old just yet. So a will comes into play when you die. So a will set out what you want to happen to your estate if you're no longer here. If you have young children, it can also set out who you want to look after those children while they're dependent. So a will only comes into play after death. So you need to think about who you want your beneficiaries to be, but also who you want the executors to be. So that is who is going to administer that will on your death. Thinking about a power of attorney, I think is almost more important than a will, because a power of attorney will actually affect you whilst you're alive. Now, there's two types of power of attorney. There is property and finance, and there's health and well-being, and these are lasting powers of attorney. You can do either or both, and I would always recommend both. So a power of attorney will state whoever you want to act on your behalf should you no longer be able to do so. And that could be through incapacity, mental illness, or for any reason that you can no longer make your own decisions. So obviously, if we look at the financial and property power of attorney, that will allow someone to make decisions around your property and finance. If it's around health, then it's around the care that you may receive. So again, I would recommend that anybody has a power of attorney in place. And again, think carefully about who you want to make those decisions for you. My son, quite often jokingly, I think, says he's just going to stick me in a home if that happens. So make sure you think carefully about who you want to be your power of attorney. Do they know your wishes? Do they know what your thoughts, feelings, ethical considerations are around perhaps any investments that you have. So really good question, thank you. We've got another one here. So with continuous care applications, meetings with health authorities are always required, correct? Would representation from the concierge attend meetings with clients to provide expert support? Yes, they can do. Certainly at the moment, most of these meetings are being held virtually. So that's definitely something they can do. If they can't attend in person, there may be a charge for attending in person. The service that we subscribe to is a telephone-based service. But if an in-person meeting is required, then there could be a cost for that. But if they're not able to attend in person, they can certainly give you all the questions that you need to be aware of going into that meeting yourself. And they can then analyse the outcome of that meeting with you. So you could then go back with feedback, have a discussion with the concierge service, and then revert back to the health authorities with any further questions that you might have. But I think the key point there is about going into that initial meeting prepared, knowing what to expect. Quite often these meetings are overwhelming. There'll be a multidisciplinary team involved, people from various different parts of the authorities, care providers, social workers, and it can be really overwhelming knowing who's there, what their role is, and what are they going to do for you. So by bringing the concierge in early, we can make sure you're fully prepared to go into those meetings. So hopefully that answered that question. Anybody else got any more questions? I think we've pretty much covered everything that popped up there. We've got a couple more minutes left. So if anybody has anything else, please type quickly. Otherwise, we'll finish for an early lunch. No other questions coming through. Okay, fantastic. The session today has been recorded. So if you do want a recording of the webinar, just let us know. We can forward that on to you. As always, we're available here at Oakmere for any questions that you may have, whether it's long-term care related or not. I'm the only planner in the practice that is qualified and accredited with the Society for Later Life Advisors. So if you do speak to one of the other team members, they'll probably direct that query through to me. But more than happy to take any questions. The sooner you have the conversations, if you think you have a relative who is on the verge of requiring care, or you think it may be imminent, then the sooner we have these conversations, the better. I can also help and guide you through raising those conversations with people. So it may be you're thinking you have an elderly relative who might be failing but aren't aware of it themselves. It can be quite a difficult conversation to raise with somebody, suggesting that perhaps they need some help. Again, this is something that I'm very familiar with, something we've been through with a lot of clients, so I can give you some guidance and coaching around how to approach those conversations as well. So hopefully you found today's webinar useful, informative. You might have got a few bits of information there. I'm aware that I've thrown a huge amount of information at you, but hopefully some of that has resonated and stuck. So I will bid you good day. Hope you enjoy the rest of your afternoon. It's a beautiful sunny day here in Cheshire. Enjoy the sunshine, and I look forward to seeing you all soon. Take care. Bye-bye.